Beneath the white silence of the Arctic, the earth hides a graveyard untouched by time. Bones of giants lie entombed in frozen soil, their tusks curled like echoes of a forgotten era. These mammoths once thundered across tundra plains, herds that shook the ground beneath them, now preserved in eternal permafrost, caught between life and memory. What secrets do they carry? What stories whisper from their silent remains, waiting to resurface as the ice thaws? If this journey into the frozen past moves you, join us. Like, share, and subscribe to step deeper into the mysteries hidden beneath the Arctic's eternal cold. The Arctic stretches endlessly, a vast cathedral of ice where silence reigns with a terrible beauty. Here, the wind is both sculptor and singer, carving snow into ridges like frozen waves and carrying with it the echoes of a forgotten age. The sun, when it dares to rise, hovers low on the horizon, casting long shadows over a land that rarely knows warmth. In this endless white, the earth itself hides its secrets beneath layers of frost older than civilization. It is a world that feels less like a place on earth and more like a threshold between life and eternity. Deep beneath this unyielding crust lies a memory preserved, a gallery of bones and frozen flesh. The permafrost soil locked in an icy grip has become nature's vault, a tomb that resists decay. Here the mammoths sleep, their colossal frames, once towering above the tundra, now lie encased in time itself. They are not fossils of stone, nor fragments of brittle skeletons. They are bodies, intact as though only yesterday they roamed the snow, their hair still coarse, their eyes hollow, their blood congealed but present. It is as if death here was not an ending but a pause, a stillness that refuses to let go. To walk across this frozen kingdom is to feel the weight of ghosts. Every ridge of ice may conceal a story. Every crack in the ground whispers of a beast that once thundered across the plains. Imagine the sound, herds of mammoths moving as one, their tusks gleaming ivory arcs against the pale sky. Imagine the earth trembling beneath their march, the snow rising in clouds around their heavy steps. That thunder is gone now, replaced by silence so complete it hums in the bones of those who enter. Yet the land remembers. The land does not forget. Permafrost is not mere ice. It is layered history, compacted year upon year, century upon century. Each stratum is a page in Earth's memory, written not in ink but in frost. Pollen grains, plant roots, fragments of bone all locked away, sealed beneath frozen ground that stretches hundreds of meters deep. Scientists who dig here are not only excavating soil, they are excavating time. With every spadeful of earth, they peel back millennia, uncovering a record untouched since the mammoths themselves fell. And sometimes, what they find is not the fragile trace of life, but life itself, stilled in mid-motion, uncorrupted, waiting. There is a strange reverence in such discoveries. To stumble upon the body of a mammoth calf, its skin still bearing the folds of youth, its eyelashes still delicate as though it merely sleeps, it feels less like science and more like trespass. The Arctic does not easily surrender its dead, and when it does, it feels like a secret revealed too soon, as though the ice intended to keep them forever. One cannot help but wonder, do we deserve to look upon them? Do we honor their memory, or do we merely disturb their eternal rest? The kingdom of ice and bone is beautiful, but it is also merciless. The cold does not forgive. For the mammoths, it was both cradle and coffin. They thrived in its open expanses, finding food where little else dared to grow, enduring winds that could cut like blades. Yet the very land that nurtured them became their grave. A sudden storm, a broken leg, a fall into a pit of snow, and the ice swallowed them whole. Time did the rest. Thousands of years passed, civilizations rose and fell, and still they lay untouched, waiting beneath the frozen ground. Now, as the climate warms and the Arctic's grip loosens, these giants are returning to the world of the living, not in flesh and thunder, but in silent, fragile remains. The melting ice gives up its prisoners reluctantly, offering glimpses of a past that feels impossibly close. A leg here, a tusk there, the entire body of a young calf pulled into the light after 30,000 years. The line between present and past blurs, as though the two epochs were colliding, as though the mammoths were not gone, but merely sleeping until we arrived. And so this land, austere and untouchable, becomes a bridge across time. Step upon its frozen soil, and you stand not only in the present but also in the Pleistocene, side by side with the mammoths. Their presence lingers in every gust of wind, every shadow across the snow, every rumble beneath the frozen crust. This is their kingdom still, and we are but visitors wandering among its graves. The Arctic night is not truly dark. When the sun retreats for months, the heavens ignite with shimmering curtains of green and violet. The aurora dances above the tundra like a fire frozen in the sky, as though the world itself remembers the breath of the mammoths and paints it across the firmament. Beneath this spectacle lies the silence of eternity, snow stretching beyond sight, glaciers creaking in their slow crawl, rivers locked beneath armor of ice. In such vastness, the presence of humanity feels small, almost intrusive. We are trespassers in a world that was never made for us, where the true sovereigns once bore tusks that reached to the sky. Imagine standing in that stillness, hearing only the crunch of snow beneath your boots, when suddenly your eyes fall upon an ivory curve rising from the ground. At first it seems like driftwood, bleached by centuries, but as your hands brush away the frost, you realize it is no wood at all. It is tusk massive, ridged, and impossibly old, yet as solid as the day it was carried. You kneel, brushing back the layers of snow, revealing more: the skull, the long jawline, the suggestion of a body that once was. The earth has lifted the past to the surface, offering a relic of a vanished herd. In such moments, time collapses. You are no longer standing in the modern age, but in the shadow of the Ice Age, staring into the face of something that lived 30,000 years before your first breath. The permafrost is both cruel and kind. It preserves without mercy, holding creatures as they were at the moment of death. A step taken onto thin ice, a plunge into frozen mud, and life was sealed forever. The mammoth calf known as Luba, found in Siberia in 2007, is one such tragedy and wonder. She was only a month old when she suffocated in mud, yet the cold wrapped her so tightly that her body remained untouched. Her small frame still bore the wrinkles of skin. Her stomach still held her last meal. Her face carried the quiet innocence of youth. To look upon her was to look through a window in time, not at a skeleton, but at a child who never grew old. Such discoveries shake the soul as much as they inspire science. For the people who live in the Arctic, the Nenets, the Yakut, the Chukchi, the mammoth is not simply a relic, but a spirit of the land. Their legends speak of giants who once roamed beneath the earth, surfacing only in death. Some believe the mammoth burrows like a mole, and that when its body is exposed, it perishes under the touch of air. Others see its tusks as sacred gifts, tokens of strength and endurance left behind by ancestors too powerful to truly vanish. To them, the frozen remains are not mere curiosities. They are messengers, reminders of a bond between humanity and the great beasts of the tundra. The land itself seems to guard these secrets. When explorers cut into the permafrost, they often describe the smell of ancient earth rising, the scent of dampness and decay sealed for thousands of years. It is a smell that does not belong in the present, a scent carried across ages, startling in its rawness. One scientist once said it felt as though the breath of the mammoths themselves had been trapped in that soil, released only when we dared disturb it. Such moments carry away a reminder that we are not merely uncovering the past, but unsealing its silence. And as the ice continues to melt, more emerges. Carcasses of wolves, bison, even birds long extinct are surfacing beside the mammoths. An entire menagerie of the lost world resurfacing in fragments. Each discovery is both treasure and warning. The permafrost is surrendering not only the beauty of preservation, but also the fragility of what lies ahead. What else waits beneath the surface? What stories will rise as the cold retreats? Each thaw feels like the turning of a page we were never meant to read too quickly. This is why the Arctic is called a kingdom of ice and bone. Not because it is ruled by death, but because it holds within it a power greater than death. Memory. The bones speak. The ice sings. Every tusk, every fragment of flesh, every strand of mammoth hair that brushes against the hand of a scientist or hunter is a reminder that the past is never gone. It simply waits. And in this kingdom, patience is eternal. The Arctic is a paradox at once barren and overflowing. To the untrained eye, it appears lifeless, an endless sweep of snow and wind where nothing can survive. But look closer, and the land reveals its quiet abundance. Lichen clings to rocks in delicate green veils. Grasses push stubbornly through patches of thawed soil, feeding herds of reindeer that dot the horizon like shadows in the snow. Arctic foxes prowl, their coats blending seamlessly into the landscape, their eyes sharp and searching. Ravens circle above, their calls harsh against the quiet, as if mocking the silence that rules below. It is a world not empty, but restrained, where every heartbeat is measured, every breath a triumph. Yet even in this fragile ecosystem, the ghosts of mammoths loom larger than the living. Scientists speak of how these giants once shaped the very land. Their migrations carved paths through forests, trampling vegetation and opening new grasslands. Their tusks gouged through snow to uncover the buried grasses beneath, feeding not only themselves, but making food accessible to smaller animals that followed. They were gardeners of the Ice Age, architects of an ecosystem long gone. Without them, the Arctic feels somehow incomplete, a stage with its actors missing. The silence between scenes stretched too far. In recent years, explorers and indigenous hunters alike have stumbled upon remains emerging from riverbanks and thawing cliffs. The permafrost, long sealed, is softening under the warmth of a changing climate. Sometimes it is a tusk jutting from the earth, spiraled and yellowed but strong. Sometimes it is a frozen limb, still covered in fur. On rare occasions, it is the entire body of a mammoth, an animal whose last breath was drawn tens of thousands of years ago, returned suddenly to the light of day. Each discovery is met with awe, but also unease. For every wonder the ice reveals, it also hints at the fragility of the world as we know it. Standing before such a find is not simply an act of science. It is an encounter with time itself. Imagine the sensation. Your hand brushes against the coarse hair of a creature that grazed before human civilization was born. Your eyes meet the hollow sockets of a beast that saw a world where glaciers stretched across continents. And for a moment, the gulf of 30 millennia collapses. It is as though you are looking into a mirror of Earth's memory, and the reflection staring back carries the weight of all that has been lost. There is also a sense of dread. The ice does not release its treasures freely. The melt that uncovers mammoths is the same melt that threatens the balance of the modern world. As the permafrost softens, it releases not only bones and tusks, but gases trapped from millennia: carbon dioxide, methane, silent forces with the power to reshape the climate. The mammoths resurface not merely as relics of the past, but as harbingers of a future unsettled. What we gain in knowledge, we risk in consequence. The kingdom of ice and bone is not a passive vault. It is alive, shifting, and in its slow awakening lies both revelation and danger. Yet despite this looming shadow, wonder prevails. There is something profoundly human in our response to these ancient beings. We do not turn away. We lean closer. We study their teeth to learn what they ate. We analyze the rings of their tusks as though they were trees, tracing the years of their lives, reading the hardships they endured. In their remains, we search for answers not only about them, but about ourselves. Why did they fall while we endured? What lessons are written in their silence? And what does it mean that their world, once thought sealed in ice, is spilling into ours once more? The Arctic offers no easy answers. It simply presents itself, vast, cold, indifferent, yet alive with memory. To walk its frozen plains is to feel time pressing close, as though the past is not buried but sleeping just beneath your feet. And in that awareness comes a humbling truth. We are not the first to walk this land, nor will we be the last. We are temporary, like footprints in snow, destined to vanish with the next wind. But the mammoths remain, guardians of a kingdom we can glimpse yet never truly claim. Night falls heavy in the Arctic, and with it comes a silence deeper than any cathedral, heavier than stone. The cold is absolute, settling into every crack, every breath, every heartbeat. Beneath your boots, the ground is not simply frozen, it is alive with memory, a vault pressed shut for tens of thousands of years. The kingdom of ice and bone does not yield easily, but when it does, the unveiling feels almost ceremonial, as though the land itself chooses the moment. There are stories of hunters crossing rivers at dawn, their sled dogs halting suddenly, noses twitching at a scent unfamiliar. At first, it seems impossible. The musky tang of flesh, sharp and metallic in the frozen air. But then, through the thin mist, a dog shape emerges from the riverbank, a mammoth leg, thick with muscle and hair, protruding from thawing ground as though stepping back into existence. In such moments, all mixes with fear. The beast is both dead and not dead, a paradox carried in ice. It reminds us that time is not linear here. Loops, bends, folds back on itself. Past and present merge beneath the aurora's glow. Scientists who work in these regions speak of the uncanny. When they peel away ice from a mammoth's body, they sometimes find the stomach still filled with half-chewed grasses, the tongue preserved, the eyes sunken but intact. These details defy expectation, stripping away the comforting distance of history. This is not a fossil, it is a corpse, flesh and blood. An animal that once exhaled warm clouds into the frosty air, that once nudged its calf forward with a curl of its trunk, now lying still, yet unbearably close. To witness such preservation is to feel as though you are trespassing into a moment not yours to see. But the kingdom does not reveal itself without cost. The melt that uncovers these relics is not the slow, patient erosion of natural cycles. It is accelerated by our own hands. Global temperatures rise, glaciers retreat, and what was hidden emerges at a pace faster than we can understand. Mammoths rise not because they are summoned, but because the ice that once held them is dying. In their reappearance, there is beauty, yes, but also warning. Each body released is a message written in ice. The past is stirring, but it does not return without consequence. Indigenous voices remind us of this balance. For centuries, the Yakut and other Arctic peoples treated mammoth remains as sacred. Tusks carved into tools and ornaments carried not only utility but reverence, believed to channel the strength of the beasts they once belonged to. Stories passed down through generations spoke of mammoths as guardians of the underworld, powerful beings who surfaced only when disturbed. In these tales, the earth itself resented the exposure, punishing those who disrespected its keepers. To dig too greedily was to invite misfortune. And perhaps, in some way, those old warnings echo true. For in seeking the mammoths, we are also unsealing forces greater than ourselves. Still, the allure is undeniable. Imagine holding a strand of mammoth hair in your gloved hand, its coarse texture whispering across your palm. Imagine tracing the ridges of a tusk, each groove a record of stress, of seasons survived, of battles fought. In those details lies intimacy, a connection across time so profound it borders on sacred. The mammoths are not gone. They are here, waiting beneath the ice, offering pieces of their story as the earth shifts. And so the kingdom of ice and bone endures not a relic of death, but a realm where time itself resists oblivion. Its silence is not emptiness, but fullness, saturated with memory. Every gust of wind, every shiver of aurora, every crack of thawing ice is a reminder that this land holds the weight of worlds. The mammoths may have fallen, but in the Arctic they are not lost. They are preserved, suspended in a kind of eternity, as though nature itself refuses to let their song fade. When we walk here, we are not explorers. We are pilgrims, tracing the outlines of giants, listening for voices in the snow. The kingdom welcomes no kings, no conquerors. It is sovereign unto itself, ruled by ice, guarded by bone, and haunted by the silence of herds that once shook the earth. And as the chapter closes, one truth lingers like breath in the frozen air. This land belongs to them still. The Arctic is their cathedral, their grave, their eternal home. And we, small and transient, are only passing through. Before they became relics beneath the permafrost, mammoths were sovereigns of the open tundra. They moved like living mountains across a frozen stage, colossal yet graceful, shaping the land with every step. To imagine them is to imagine a world wilder, harsher, and yet fuller than our own, a world where survival demanded not only strength, but resilience, patience, and unity. The mammoth was no mere beast. Standing over 4 meters tall at the shoulder, crowned with spiraled tusks stretching as long as a grown man's height, they embodied power in form and presence. Their woolen coats, layered thick against the cold, rippled with shades of rust and gold beneath the pale Arctic sun. When they walked, the ground trembled. When they gathered, their herds stretched to the horizon like a tide of fur and ivory. They were architects of fear and awe, both predators and prey shaping their movements around these titans of the Ice Age. Yet, despite their size, they were not solitary conquerors. Mammoths lived in herds bound by kinship, guided by matriarchs whose memories stretched across landscapes. Just as elephants do today, these matriarchs carried within them maps of rivers, groves, and valleys, remembering where grass would sprout even after decades of snow. They led the young, the old, and the strong alike, weaving paths across hundreds of miles. In their memory was survival. In their togetherness was strength. And in their presence, the tundra itself bent to their rhythm. The sound of a mammoth herd was unlike anything we know now. Imagine the deep rumble of their calls, resonant as drums rolling across an endless plain. Imagine the snorts of calves tucked close to their mothers, the clatter of tusks brushing against one another as they walked in tight formations. Each step crushed the snow beneath them, pressing it into stone-hard layers, shaping trails that smaller creatures would later follow. Their migrations were not just movement, they were pulse and breath, the heartbeat of the Ice Age world. They lived alongside creatures now vanished into myth, the steppe bison, woolly rhinoceros, cave lions, and towering short-faced bears. Together they formed an ecosystem vast and strange, balanced on the edge of survival. The mammoths were central to it all. Where they fed, grasses spread. Where they walked, forests thinned. They opened spaces for wolves to hunt, for birds to forage, for reindeer to graze. They were keystones, without which the land itself began to change. To see them was not just to see animals, but to see shapers of Earth's skin. And yet, for all their majesty, the mammoths were vulnerable. Their strength did not make them invincible. Calves strayed, storms raged, ice fractured beneath heavy feet. They endured cold that could peel the breath from the lungs, but hunger was a greater predator than snow. Winters grew long, grasses scarce, and herds weakened. Nature gave them size, tusks, and coats, but no creature escapes the cruelty of scarcity. Even the giants walked with fragility, as fleeting as any small bird perched on the tundra grass. For early humans, the mammoth was both terror and salvation. To face such a beast was to gamble with death, yet to claim its body was to secure life for weeks, even months. Meat, bone, hide, and tusk, all parts of the mammoth, offered survival. Their image etched itself into cave walls, carved into ivory figurines, worshipped in ritual, remembered in firelit stories passed from parent to child. To humans, they were not only prey, but symbols, massive embodiments of endurance and mystery. Beasts so great that even gods seem carved in their image. The tundra without them feels silent, incomplete. Their absence is like a missing note in a song, a silence where thunder once rolled. To imagine their herds is to feel awe swelling in the chest, to hear the earth groan beneath them, to see ivory cutting arcs against the horizon. They were not fossils, not corpses, not specimens. They were giants who lived, breathed, and thrived, who carried the weight of their world on their broad, fur-clad shoulders. And though the ice has long since claimed them, their echo remains. It hums in the permafrost. It lingers in the bones we uncover. It survives in the memory of the land itself, whispering of the time when the tundra was theirs, when the giants walked. The tundra was their canvas, and on it the mammoths painted trails of survival. With each season, they moved across vast distances, following the rhythm of ice and grass. In summer, when the snow loosened its grip and the plains unfurled patches of green, herds fanned out across river valleys and meadows, grazing on sedges and wildflowers. Their trunks swept the ground in constant motion, pulling up mouthfuls of grasses, stripping bark from willows, tossing dust over their backs to ward off insects. Calves trotted between the legs of their mothers, their tiny trunks clumsy, reaching for food they could not yet grasp. The herd moved as one body, a living tide, each individual a note in a greater harmony. When winter returned, the land transformed into a white desert. The mammoths pressed forward through storms that stung like knives, breaking ice with their tusks to uncover brittle grasses hidden beneath. Hunger gnawed, but memory guided them. The matriarchs remembered the routes passed down through generations, ancient maps etched into instinct and experience. They led their families to places where rivers rarely froze, where the wind kept the snow thin, where survival clung to the edge of possibility. Without such guidance, the herd would scatter, starve, or fall to the predators that trailed them like shadows. And there were always predators. Cave lions stalked the edges of the herds, their golden eyes flashing in the pale light, waiting for the weak to falter. Packs of wolves followed too, clever and relentless, watching for calves to stray. Even the short-faced bear, taller than any man when it stood upright, sometimes prowled the paths of mammoths, drawn by the promise of meat. Yet few dared strike at the heart of the herd. The mammoths were guardians of one another, forming defensive circles around calves, trunks raised, tusks lowered like ivory walls. To confront them was to face not just a beast, but a fortress of giants bound by loyalty. Life was not only survival, it was connection. Mammoths were creatures of memory and emotion. Mothers nurtured their young with patience, guiding them with gentle nudges of the trunk. Calves played, chasing one another through the snow, trumpeting with excitement when they discovered the simple joy of rolling in dust or splashing through shallow streams. Older siblings cared for the newborns, while the herd as a whole grieved when one of their own fell. Bones have been found surrounded by signs of repeated trampling, as though the herd lingered, unwilling to move on, their mourning pressed into the earth itself. In this they were like elephants, creatures who carried within them not only the strength of giants, but the tenderness of kin. Their migration shaped the land as much as the land shaped them. Herds pressed down trails so deep they became etched into the tundra, paths later used by humans and animals alike. Their constant grazing prevented forests from reclaiming the grasslands, keeping the plains open, fertile, and alive with diversity. Some scientists believe that without them, the ecosystem shifted, grasses giving way to shrubs and trees, altering the balance that had once sustained so many species. The mammoths were not just part of the world. They were architects of it. To walk among them would have been to walk among living legends. Imagine standing on a ridge, wind in your face, as a herd stretched out below you. Dozens of massive bodies swaying like waves, ivory glinting in the light, calves calling out as they scurried between legs. The matriarch at the front, her trunk sweeping side to side as though she were conducting a symphony of survival. The air would tremble with their presence. The earth would quiver beneath your feet, and you would feel small, not diminished, but humbled, as though gazing at something that belonged to a time greater than your own. Yet even in their might, fragility lingered. A calf caught in deep snow could falter. A weakened adult might collapse, unable to rise again. The herd would mourn, but the march continued. Survival demanded it. Each loss was absorbed into the memory of the herd, another echo in the long song of their kind. They endured for hundreds of thousands of years, through ice and famine, through predators and storms, surviving where others perished. And still, their time was finite. But in these moments, before extinction's shadow fell, they were the true giants of the tundra, creatures of power and grace, bound together, sculpting the land as they passed, reminding the world with every step that life, in its grandest form, is both fragile and indomitable. For early humans, the mammoth was more than a beast that roamed the frozen steppe. It was a presence that shaped their very existence. To see one emerge from the mist, its shaggy frame towering over the horizon, tusks spiraling like crescents of pale fire, was to be confronted by a force that felt ancient, eternal. These giants were not simply creatures to be hunted. They were teachers, symbols, and sometimes gods. When bands of hunter-gatherers tracked mammoths, it was not with carelessness but with reverence. Their survival depended on these animals, and so did their stories. The bones and tusks that littered the plains became the scaffolding of human imagination. In caves across Europe and Siberia, paintings and carvings immortalized mammoths, scratched into stone by flickering torchlight. Their hulking silhouettes march across walls alongside bison, horses, and lions, captured not only as prey, but as spirits to be honored. To carve a mammoth into bone or ivory was to capture a fragment of its power, to preserve its memory in a world where memory was life itself. For those who braved the Ice Age, a mammoth kill meant salvation. A single beast could feed a community for weeks, its hide sewn into shelter against the bitter wind, its tusks shaped into tools, its bones used as beams for dwellings when wood was scarce. Archaeological sites reveal entire huts framed with ribs and tusks, draped in hides, houses built from the body of the mammoth, where firelight flickered on ivory walls. To live inside such a shelter was to live within the remains of greatness, cradled by the very being that gave its life so humans could endure. But hunting them was perilous. To bring down a mammoth required courage beyond measure and cooperation as seamless as the herd itself. Spears tipped with flint, traps dug into frozen soil, ambush planned with precision. Each attempt was a gamble. A single misstep, and hunters could be crushed beneath hooves or gored by tusks. Yet the reward was so immense that the risk became ritual. Some scholars believe that before hunts, ceremonies were held, chants and dances performed around fires, prayers whispered to spirits, asking for favor and forgiveness. To kill a mammoth was not conquest. It was communion. These giants seeped into the myths of humanity's first storytellers. To some, the mammoth was a guardian spirit, a being who carried the earth upon its back. To others, its tusks were the frozen branches of a world tree, spiraling toward the heavens. And in whispered tales told around the fire, the thunder of mammoth herds was the heartbeat of the land itself. They were living metaphors, embodiments of endurance in a world that tested every breath, symbols of both abundance and fragility. Even their deaths left marks upon the human spirit. Some sites reveal mammoth bones arranged in circles, possibly shrines or sacred places, where hunters may have gathered to honor what had been given. The memory of these animals was etched not only in survival, but in the sacred woven into rituals of life, death, and renewal. In them, humans saw reflections of themselves, social beings bound by family, protectors of young, mourners of the dead, survivors against an unforgiving earth. Imagine, then, standing in a cave as shadows leap across the walls. A hunter crouches near the fire, carving the outline of a mammoth with deliberate strokes. He has seen the herd, heard the ground thunder beneath his feet, felt awe as much as fear. In his carving, the mammoth becomes eternal, no longer a fleeting shape vanishing into snow, but a spirit captured in line and curve. Those who come after him will see it, recognize it, and remember. Even when the herds move on, even when the bones crumble to dust, the mammoth will live in memory, in story, in art. And perhaps this was the true gift of the giants, that they taught humans how to remember. Not just with the body, but with the mind and the heart. They showed that survival was more than the act of enduring. It was the act of passing knowledge, of honoring what came before, of holding on to the sacred threads of existence, even in the coldest of worlds. For in the end, the mammoth was not just an animal of the Ice Age. It was a bridge between worlds, between nature and spirit, survival and culture, flesh and myth. It carried humanity forward, not only through its meat and hide, but through the stories and inspired stories that, thousands of years later, still whisper of giants who once walked the tundra. But even the mightiest are not eternal. For all their towering presence, for all the echoes of thunder that once rolled across the Ice Age plains, the mammoths were bound by the same fragile thread as every creature: time and change. The very landscapes that had nurtured them began to shift, and with that shift came an unraveling. The Ice Age world was not static. Glaciers retreated, slowly, almost imperceptibly, but each step backward reshaped the earth. Valleys opened, forests crept northward, grasslands dwindled. Where once the steppes spread endlessly, rich in sedges and wildflowers, now woodlands began to rise, closing off the open expanses that mammoths depended upon. The air softened. Winters grew shorter, summers warmer. For humans, this meant new opportunities, rivers teeming with fish, forests offering game, fruits, and nuts. But for mammoths, the change was a slow betrayal. Their kingdom of ice was shrinking. Their world was vanishing beneath their feet. And still they endured for a time. Herds moved farther north, clinging to the margins of the cold. They lingered on the open tundras of Siberia, the frozen plains of Alaska, the windswept islands scattered in the Arctic Ocean. Yet even there, their numbers dwindled. The herds that once darkened horizons became scattered, fragmented, smaller with each passing generation. Human presence, too, became an unshakable weight. Hunters, who once approached them with reverence, learned to perfect their methods. Spears became surer, traps more cunning. Where once a mammoth could vanish into the wilderness itself was shrinking, and with it, their sanctuary. We cannot know with certainty whether it was the hand of man, the shifting climate, or both intertwined, but the result was the same. Giants began to fall, not in sudden collapse, but in a long, quiet fading. Imagine a herd moving under a pale Arctic sky, their breaths clouding in the frozen air. The calves stumble, nudge against their mothers for warmth. The elders march on, tusks sweeping low, eyes ancient and patient. They do not know they are among the last. To them, the tundra is eternal, the rhythm of migration unbroken. They carry with them the memory of countless seasons, the echo of paths worn deep into the land. Yet just beyond the horizon, change waits. The grasses will thin, the winters will weaken, and one day, no hooves will thunder where they once roamed. The final survivors held out on Wrangel Island, a remote fragment of land adrift in the Arctic Ocean. There, far from the encroaching forests and hunters of the mainland, a small population lingered. For thousands of years after the last great herds had vanished, they endured in isolation. Imagine it a lonely world of ice and wind, where a remnant of giants walked long after the rest of their kind were gone. Until, finally, they too fell silent, disappearing into the same shadow that claims all species in time. Their passing was not marked by ceremony, not witnessed by the eyes of the world. They left no final roar, no thunderous farewell across the tundra. Only bones remained, locked in the frozen ground, awaiting discovery. Yet their absence was felt, even if unnamed. The earth had lost a rhythm, a heartbeat of the wild that had once defined the age. For humans, the mammoth lived on not in flesh, but in memory. Their images remained etched in cave walls, their tusks carved into tools and ornaments, their legends carried through stories whispered across generations. They became creatures of myth as much as of history, spirits of endurance, symbols of a world larger and wilder than the one we inherited. And so, as the Ice Age gave way to the Age of Man, the mammoth crossed a threshold. No longer a neighbor, no longer a rival or prey, it became something else entirely. A ghost, a reminder of what the earth once held. Its silence was a prelude, a space left open for questions we still ask today. What does it mean that such giants could fall while we endure? What does it mean that their world dissolved while ours expanded? And what will it mean when the ice begins to whisper their secrets once more? The mammoth story does not end with extinction. It waits, suspended in ice, in bone, in memory. Its footsteps may no longer press into the tundra, but its shadow stretches across time, reaching toward us. And as we step into the next chapter of their tale, we find ourselves drawn into the mystery of their disappearance, not as an ending, but as a threshold into what comes after. Extinction does not come like a sudden storm. It is slower, quieter, an unraveling so gradual that those living within it may not even sense its weight until it has already passed. For the mammoths, it was not one great cataclysm that erased them from the earth, but a steady narrowing of possibilities, a corridor of survival that grew tighter with every generation until there was no space left to walk. The end of the Ice Age was both a rebirth and a funeral. Across the globe, glaciers that had once sealed valleys and sculpted continents melted away, their retreat opening rivers and lakes, their runoff swelling oceans higher. Where ice had ruled for millennia, green returned. Birch and pine spread northward, mosses gave way to shrubs, and grasses thinned beneath the creeping shade. To the human eye, this was a transformation, a softening of a once brutal world. But to the mammoths, it was the slow theft of their kingdom. The sprawling steppe tundra, rich in sedges and herbs, the very stage upon which their lives were written, was dissolving beneath the roots of forests. For herds accustomed to boundless plains, this closing landscape was suffocating. They followed ancient migration paths, only to find them blocked by woodlands. They pushed farther north, where the cold lingered longest, but even there the ground changed, thawing, softening, reshaping. Once vast feeding grounds shrank to islands of survival. The mammoths were forced into smaller and smaller refuges, pockets of frozen earth surrounded by a world that no longer belonged to them. And always alongside the shifting climate came the hunters. Humans had spread across continents, their tools sharper, their cooperation more refined. Where once a mammoth stood as a near mythical figure, a giant that could crush a hunter with a single step, it became a prize of survival, its hide, bone, and flesh ensuring human endurance in an age of transition. A single hunt could sustain a community for weeks. The risk was immense, but the reward was irresistible. Did humans push the mammoths into extinction? Or were they merely witnesses to an inevitable decline? The truth is tangled, lying somewhere between. Climate change stripped away their lands. Humans quickened the pace. Archaeological evidence suggests that in some regions, herds had already begun to dwindle before human pressure grew intense. But elsewhere, kill sites tell a harsher story: mammoths driven into pits, pierced by spears. their carcasses butchered with precision. Perhaps it was not one cause but the cruel symmetry of two. A world changing too fast for adaptation, and a rival species rising too swiftly in skill. Imagine the perspective of a mammoth calf, trailing close behind its mother as the herd migrates across thinning plains. The grasses are sparse, the cold less certain, the forest edges closer each year. Shadows move in the distance, small, upright figures armed with fire and stone. The calf knows nothing of extinction, nothing of endings. It knows only the warmth of its herd, the pull of instinct guiding it north. But each year the herds are fewer, the journey shorter, the dangers greater. The calf's world is shrinking, though it cannot see the horizon of its loss. Extinction, in its cruelest form, is not a sudden silence but a fading song. One by one, herds diminished. One by one, valleys emptied, until the thunder of hooves that had once shaken the earth became nothing more than memory. By the time the last isolated populations clung to life on islands like Wrangel, the great herds were already gone. What remained were whispers, bones buried in permafrost, tusks jutting from thawing cliffs, stories etched in the imagination of humankind. For us, looking back across that gulf of time, the loss feels immense. We imagine the plains alive with their majesty, the horizon darkened by their march, the cold air trembling with their power. To know they are gone is to feel the weight of fragility that even giants, even the architects of Ice Age ecosystems, can vanish. It is a reminder that nothing is untouchable, that the thread binding life to earth can be cut, silently, irrevocably. And so the mammoths passed into shadow, not with a roar, but with a long exhale that faded into the wind. Their bones sank into frozen ground. Their spirits slipped into memory. Yet their absence was not an ending, but the opening of a question. What can their extinction teach us, those who now hold the world's future in our hands? The extinction of the mammoths is one of prehistory's most enduring mysteries. It is a riddle whispered by frozen bones, a question carved into tusks that have slept for 30,000 years. Scientists and storytellers alike lean over these remains, searching for patterns, piecing together fragments of a vanished world. And yet, despite decades of study, the answer is never simple. Extinction is rarely a single blade, it is 1,000 cuts, each one slow, subtle, inevitable. One theory speaks of climate alone. As the Pleistocene drew to its close, the vast steppes that had fed herds of mammoths for millennia began to shrink. The lush grasslands, rich in sedges and wildflowers, gave way to forests and wetlands. With each season, the balance tipped further. The mammoths, bound to their open tundras, struggled to adapt. Starvation, not violence, may have been their greatest predator. A world too warm, too green, too changed. The giants simply could not find enough to eat. But others argue that humans played the sharper role. Archaeological sites tell their story in blood and bone. Spear points lodged in ribs, deep cut marks etched into skeletons where stone tools sliced through flesh. A single mammoth could feed a tribe, provide sinew for bows, tusks for tools, hides for shelter. For hunters on the edge of survival, the mammoth was not merely prey, it was salvation. And perhaps that salvation came too often, too relentlessly. As human populations spread, the herds dwindled. One by one, the great gatherings of mammoths became rarer, until silence replaced thunder. Still others see extinction not as the triumph of one force, but the convergence of many. Climate pressed in from one side, humans from the other, and disease may have struck from within. Pathogens carried by changing environments, or even by humans themselves, could have tipped fragile populations over the edge. Small, isolated groups would have been particularly vulnerable. A sickness spreading through a single herd might erase it completely, leaving no survivors to carry its line forward. Then, there are the mysteries still debated. Could massive volcanic eruptions have played a role, darkening skies, chilling summers, or reducing the plants that fed them? Could shifts in the Earth's orbit and the subtle dance of ice ages have written their fate long before the first spear was ever cast? Each possibility is a piece of a puzzle, each one fitting uneasily into a broader picture. But perhaps the true answer lies not in choosing one, but in recognizing the cruel weight of all combined. Yet the strangest twist of all is that the Mammoth story did not end entirely in the Ice Age. On Wrangel Island in the Arctic Ocean, a small population endured for thousands of years after their mainland cousins were gone. Trapped by geography, sheltered by isolation, they clung to survival until as recently as 4,000 years ago, when the pyramids of Egypt already stood, when human civilization was writing itself into history. Imagine that, while scribes pressed hieroglyphs into stone beside the Nile, Mammoth still walked a lonely island in the far north. The world had forgotten them, but they had not yet forgotten the world. And then, at last, they too disappeared. The reasons remain debated. Perhaps a shortage of fresh water, perhaps inbreeding and genetic collapse, perhaps the slow gnaw of hunger. Whatever the cause, their final steps left no witness. The last trumpet of the mammoth echoed into empty air, heard only by the wind. What lingers is the ache of possibility. We stand in the present, holding their bones, their DNA, their frozen remains. We can trace the grooves of their tusks, study the grass still trapped between their teeth, map the genetic code written in their cells. We can know them with a precision their hunters could never imagine. And yet the deeper we know them, the sharper the question becomes. Why could we not save them then? The extinction of the mammoth is more than a chapter in natural history. It is a mirror held to our own future. They remind us that no species, no matter how vast, no matter how powerful, is immune to change. They remind us that survival is fragile, that abundance can become absence in the blink of an age. And they leave us with a haunting possibility. If the world could lose them, what else might it lose if we are not careful? The silence left by extinction is never complete. In the Arctic, the Earth itself refuses to let the mammoths be forgotten. Their bodies, sealed in permafrost for tens of thousands of years, emerge like time capsules when the ground thaws. A tusk protruding from a riverbank, a leg encased in ice, still covered in fur, an entire calf, its skin wrinkled, its eyes closed, as though merely asleep. These remains are not fossils turned to stone, but flesh, hair, blood life, preserved in death's embrace. For scientists, every discovery is a revelation. A frozen mammoth is not only a relic of the past, but a book still open, its pages legible. The grooves on tusks tell of years of hardship and plenty, like rings on a tree recording drought and abundance. Stomach contents reveal the last meal grasses, flowers, sedges plucked in a world that no longer exists. Teeth wear shows how they grazed, how they aged, how they endured. Even isotopes in their bones whisper of migrations across vast distances, mapping the paths of giants as they followed the seasons. But the most haunting discoveries lie at the cellular level. Within these frozen bodies, DNA sleeps. Fragile, fragmented, but still carrying the code of life. Scientists have sequenced entire genomes from mammoth remains, unlocking the genetic blueprint of creatures gone for millennia. In laboratories, strands of mammoth DNA are compared to that of their closest living relatives, the Asian elephants. With each comparison, differences are cataloged, similarities mapped, and the possibility of resurrection stirs. Could the mammoth walk again, not as a ghost in memory, but as flesh in the present? It is a question that ignites both wonder and unease. Some speak of de-extinction, of bringing mammoths back through cloning or genetic engineering. By splicing mammoth genes into elephant cells, researchers imagine creating hybrids creatures that might resemble their Ice Age cousins, adapted to cold, carrying echoes of ancient bloodlines. In theory, a herd could one day graze the tundra again, reshaping ecosystems, trampling snow, reviving the steppe that once stretched endlessly. But science does not move without shadow. To revive the mammoth would be to step across an ethical threshold. Would such beings truly be mammoths or merely imitations? Could they survive in a world warmer, smaller, altered beyond recognition? And what responsibility would we bear for their lives, their suffering, their fate? To create a creature only to watch it struggle in an alien age might be cruelty disguised as wonder. Still, the dream persists, fueled by awe as much as ambition. Perhaps it is not only about bringing them back, but about atonement. The mammoth's extinction haunts us because it feels unfinished, because their story ended within reach of our beginning. To revive them would be to rewrite that ending, to grant a second chance, not just for them, but for us. And yet, even without resurrection, the mammoths already speak. Their remains tell us of resilience, of survival across ice and storm, of lives intertwined with Earth's great cycles. They teach us about climate, ecosystems, extinction, and adaptation. They remind us that life is fragile, but also stubborn, that even after death, knowledge endures. Imagine standing before the body of a mammoth calf, unearthed from Siberian ice. Its eyelashes still visible, its skin still creased from folds of muscle and fat. You are not looking at a fossil. You are looking at time itself, collapsed into the present. It is not only the calf you see, but the world it knew. Winds carrying snow across an endless plain, herds gathered under pale skies, hunters tracking through frozen silence. The calf is gone, but in its body lies a story that refuses to die. Extinction casts a long shadow, but it is not absolute. In frozen flesh, in ancient DNA, in the echoes of tusks buried deep in ice, the mammoths remain. They wait for us to listen, to learn, to decide what their memory will mean. Will they stay as ghosts, teaching us caution? Or will we dare to call them back, reshaping not only their destiny, but our own? The story of the mammoth is not only about what was lost, it is also about what remains. Though their herds no longer thunder across the steppe, their absence continues to shape the land, and their presence endures in memory, in bone, in ice. Extinction is final, yet it lingers, pressing its weight upon us like a silence that never fully settles. The shadow of the mammoth stretches across millennia, reminding us of both nature's fragility and our own power to alter it. In their remains, we glimpse more than ancient biology. We glimpse mirrors of ourselves. The mammoth's survival depended on endurance, cooperation, and adaptation. Ours does too. Their downfall came from climate shifts and human hands. Ours may come from similar forces if we fail to learn. To study their extinction is to confront our own reflection, etched in ice and bone. But there is another layer to their story, one that pulls it beyond science into myth. For thousands of years, humans have spoken of the mammoth not as a lost animal, but as a lingering spirit. To Siberian hunters, tusks rising from thawed ground were not relics of the dead, but bones of giants still slumbering beneath the earth. In medieval Europe, fossilized remains were said to belong to buried monsters, dragons, or biblical beasts. Even now, when a frozen mammoth emerges, it carries an aura of reverence, as though the past itself has risen to breathe in the present. This fusion of myth and science, of memory and discovery, creates the tension that defines the mammoth's legacy. They are at once gone and not gone, erased yet preserved, silent yet still speaking. And it is in this tension that humanity's fascination with them grows, not only as relics of deep time, but as possible companions once again. Here lies the paradox of extinction. It teaches us loss, but it also tempts us with return. The mammoth calf frozen in permafrost is both a reminder of death and a vessel of life's persistence. In its preserved flesh lies DNA. In its DNA lies possibility. And in that possibility lies a question that reverberates through laboratories and imaginations alike. Should we bring them back? The question is less about science than it is about us. To summon the mammoth would be to declare that no extinction is beyond our reach, that the line between past and present can be crossed. It would mean stepping into the role of both destroyer and creator of gods, shaping life with technology. Some see salvation in that role, a way to heal wounds we once inflicted, a way to restore what we erased. Others see hubris, a refusal to accept loss, a dangerous attempt to rewrite nature's script. And so the mammoth waits, suspended between worlds. Their story does not rest quietly in the past, nor does it fully belong to the present. It exists in a threshold space, where frozen remains thaw into revelation, and the future trembles with decisions not yet made. Perhaps this is why their memory endures so strongly. To walk among mammoth bones is to feel the immensity of time pressing close, to sense both the weight of extinction and the pulse of continuity. We are reminded that the world we inhabit was shaped not just by survival, but by vanishing. The tundra, the forests, the seas all bear the traces of what is gone. The mammoth is one of those traces, but unlike so many others, it remains tangible, touchable, immediate. Its shadow is not abstract. It can be held in the curve of a tusk, in the strand of a hair, in the pages of a genome. As Chapter 3 closes, the shadow of extinction has grown darker, but within it, a flicker of light remains. Discovery has not silenced the mammoth. If anything, it has given them a new voice, one that speaks both of caution and of possibility. Their story, though interrupted, is not over. It hangs at the edge of the future, waiting for us to decide what we will make of it. For now, we stand at the threshold, caught between reverence and ambition, mourning and creation. The mammoths whisper from the ice, and the world listens. The next chapter will ask the inevitable question: if the past can be touched so closely, how far will we go to shape it into tomorrow? The tundra winds sweep across a graveyard of bones. Yet in the laboratories of our age, another kind of wind stirs one born not of nature, but of human ambition. The mammoth, long entombed in ice, now lingers on the edge of return, summoned not by myths or dreams, but by the sharp precision of science. The question that once belonged to shamans and storytellers, can the dead walk again, is now whispered beneath the cold fluorescence of laboratory lights. Here, extinction is no longer seen as a closed door. It is a wound, perhaps, but one that might be stitched, rewritten, even undone. At the heart of this idea lies the mammoth, a creature whose preserved flesh has offered fragments of its code, the long spiral ladder of DNA. Each strand is a ghost, delicate and damaged, yet still holding whispers of life. To study it is to hold a key to the past. To replicate it is to attempt to turn that key in the lock of time itself. Scientists call this pursuit the extinction. It is not resurrection in the mystical sense, but rather an intricate weaving of ancient and modern, of mammoth and elephant. For though the mammoth's body lies preserved, its genome lies fractured, broken by the ages. To piece it back together requires both patience and daring. Step by step, researchers map its code against that of its living cousin, the Asian elephant, itself endangered, itself a relic of deep time. They align fragments of mammoth DNA, like shards of a shattered mirror, trying to glimpse in its reflection a whole once lost. The process is painstaking, almost surgical. A sequence of genes responsible for cold-resistant blood, for thick insulating hair, for layers of fat that once shielded the mammoth against icebound winds. These are identified, edited, spliced into the genome of an elephant. What emerges is not a pure mammoth, but a hybrid, an elephant reborn with mammoth traits, an echo rather than an original. It is a scientific chorus, one voice joining another, until together they form something new that sings the old song. And yet, the implications are staggering. To walk once more among mammoths would be to blur the boundary between past and future. Their tread upon the tundra would not simply be the return of a vanished beast. It would be proof that extinction, once thought absolute, is negotiable. But should it be? That is the question that haunts every attempt at de-extinction, as much philosophical as biological. Some argue with reverence. To restore the mammoth would be an act of redemption. Humanity once played a role in their demise. Now humanity could offer resurrection. In an age of vanishing species, of warming climates and collapsing habitats, perhaps reviving the mammoth could signal hope, proof that what is lost might not be forever beyond reach. Others argue with caution that to bring back the dead is to overstep, to tamper with balances we do not understand, to risk consequences for the sake of spectacle or pride. Still, the allure endures. The mammoth is not merely a candidate for science, it is a symbol. Its image towers over us, ancient and majestic, yet strangely familiar. To touch its life again would be to touch our own history, to stand at the scene where myth becomes reality. Perhaps that is why the idea clings so tightly to the imagination, drawing investors, visionaries, and skeptics alike into its orbit. For the tundra, where mammoths once roamed, is changing. Permafrost melts, carbon escapes, ecosystems shift. Some believe that herds of cold-adapted giants might even serve the Earth once more, trampling snow to preserve permafrost, reshaping landscapes to slow climate collapse. The idea is bold, almost fantastical, yet it is entertained in serious circles, for desperation breeds ambition. And so, the mammoth waits again, not frozen this time, but suspended in equations, in sequencers, in vials of coded memory. The laboratories hum like modern crypts, filled with fragments of life's instructions, awaiting the day when ambition and technology converge into flesh. Whether that day will arrive soon or ever remains uncertain, but the pursuit is no longer fantasy. It is real, unfolding quietly, piece by piece, in a world hungry for miracles. The graveyard of bones whispers of the past. The glow of the laboratory hums with the future. Between them stands the mammoth, half ghost, half possibility. And humanity, once its hunter, now dares to become its creator. The dream of returning the mammoth is not confined to imagination. It has found its champions in the modern age: geneticists, biotechnologists, and conservationists who dare to blur the boundary between science and myth. Among them are teams scattered across the world, each working with fragments of ancient code, as though assembling a tapestry woven from broken threads. Their laboratories are not halls of marble or temples of stone, but sanctuaries of glass and steel, humming with machines that decode life one letter at a time. In Boston, at the core of this pursuit, researchers at Harvard University have become torchbearers of the idea. Led by genetic pioneers, they pore over mammoth DNA like archaeologists of the invisible. Their tools not chisels but sequencers. Their brushes not bristles but algorithms. Piece by piece, they search for the signatures of adaptation, genes that gave mammoths their shaggy coats, their insulating fat, their tolerance of cold, so fierce it would silence other beasts. Each gene is a relic of survival, and each successful identification brings them closer to sketching the contours of a creature long vanished. The process they employ is called CRISPR, an editing tool as sharp as any scalpel, capable of cutting and pasting the language of life with breathtaking precision. With it, scientists graft mammoth traits into the genome of the Asian elephant, weaving together ancient endurance with modern fragility. It is as if two melodies, separated by ages, were being combined to form a new symphony that echoes both but belongs fully to neither. Yet this effort is not without tension. The Asian elephant, gentle-eyed and endangered, stands as both subject and vessel. To ask it to carry within its blood the shadow of another species is to burden it with our ambitions. Could they survive as surrogates? Should they be made to? Such questions coil around the science like vines, inescapable and unresolved. Still, the allure of progress persists. A company known as Colossal, founded in recent years, has taken the idea beyond academia, fueled by investment and imagination. They speak not just of reviving mammoths, but of rewilding them, returning herds to Siberia's tundra, letting them once again trample the permafrost into packed snow, slowing its thaw, preserving its ancient carbon. In their vision, the mammoth becomes not only a marvel of science, but a tool of climate restoration, a guardian of ecosystems at the brink of collapse. To skeptics, this vision borders on hubris. They warn that nature does not respond kindly to tampering, that ecosystems are delicate webs, not blank slates. What would it mean to reintroduce a creature extinct for thousands of years into a world that has already moved on without it? Would the tundra welcome its return, or would it recoil? Would we restore balance or disturb it further? These questions remain unanswered, lingering like storm clouds over the field of de-extinction. And beyond science, beyond climate, lies the question of morality. To manipulate the genome of a living being, to bend it toward our desires, what does it say about us? Are we driven by reverence for life, or by a hunger to command it? Some see the pursuit as an act of healing, an attempt to mend the wounds of the past. Others see it as an echo of the same arrogance that contributed to those wounds in the first place. The mammoth, in this view, is not merely an animal, it is a mirror reflecting our choices, our fears, our ambitions. For now, no mammoth has yet walked out of these laboratories. No herd has yet thundered across the tundra. The dream remains a pursuit, the science a construction in progress. And yet, the thought alone has shifted the way we imagine extinction. Where once we saw endings carved in stone, now we see thresholds waiting to be crossed. Where once the mammoth story ended in silence, now it hums with possibility. The laboratories buzz on, their lights glowing late into the night. Sequencers whir, data strings flicker. Scientists lean closer to screens where the alphabet of life arranges itself into patterns. Outside, the tundra lies frozen, quiet, vast. But somewhere within that quiet, a vision grows louder, the thought of giants reborn, of the ground trembling once more beneath their colossal weight. The dream of reviving the mammoth is dazzling, but it does not unfold in silence. Around every laboratory bench, around every conference stage where scientists unveil their visions, another kind of dialogue grows louder, one woven from doubt, caution, and reverence. For as much as the idea of bringing back a vanished beast thrills the imagination, it unsettles the conscience. Philosophers ask the first and simplest question: should we? To tamper with the genome of a creature extinct for millennia is not the same as preserving one still clinging to life. The mammoth no longer belongs to the living world. Its return, if it comes, would not be a restoration but a reinvention, a reconstruction shaped as much by human desire as by natural memory. Would such beings be mammoths or something altogether new? The debate spills beyond science into culture, into law, into faith. For some, the notion of summoning mammoths feels like an act of hubris, a trespass against boundaries meant to remain closed. To them, extinction is sacred, a line nature has drawn that we should not cross. They warn that to unmake death is to erode our humility, to forget that we are creatures, not creators. Yet others counter with urgency. They point to the damage humanity has inflicted on the living world species, driven to oblivion by our weapons, our hunger, our expansion. If our hands once wrought destruction, should they not now be used to repair? Perhaps reviving the mammoth would be not arrogance, but atonement. Perhaps it could serve as a symbol of hope, a declaration that loss need not be final, that mistakes can be answered with courage. The voices of indigenous communities add yet another layer. Across Siberia and North America, stories of mammoths survive not as relics but as living memory, carried in oral traditions, in myth, in reverence. To these cultures, the mammoth is not only an animal but a spirit, bound to the land and to ancestry. How would such a resurrection honor or dishonor those traditions? Would it be an act of respect or of disruption, an appropriation of something sacred into a spectacle of modern power? Ethicists raise questions about the lives of the animals themselves. If a hybrid calf were born tomorrow, what world would it inherit? Would it live among elephants, estranged from both lineages? Would it walk the tundra alone, a solitary echo of herds that no longer exist? To bring a being into existence only to let it suffer would be cruelty disguised as wonder. To raise it as a symbol while failing to protect its kin, the endangered elephants, would be contradiction, even hypocrisy. And then comes the broader dilemma, whispered across scientific circles. Every dollar spent chasing mammoths could be spent saving the creatures still with us. The rhino, the tiger, the elephant beasts teetering on the brink, whose survival depends not on resurrection but on protection. Should we not fight for them first, before we reach for the ghosts of the past? To many, the very idea of de-extinction risks becoming a distraction, a glittering promise that diverts from the urgent present. Yet the dream endures precisely because it touches something deeper than practicality. To resurrect the mammoth is to test the limits of possibility. It is to stand at the frontier where imagination meets power, where the ancient world presses against the modern one. The tension it provokes, the awe, the resistance, the reverence is less about the animal itself than about us. What kind of species are we? One that accepts loss or one that refuses it? One that bows to the past or one that dares to rewrite it? The clash of voices will not soon be resolved. Perhaps it cannot be. For the mammoth dwells in a liminal space, part memory, part ambition, part warning. Its resurrection would not merely alter ecosystems. It would alter the way we see ourselves, the way we define the boundary between what is natural and what is made, between what is gone and what still endures. For now, the debate continues like a storm circling the horizon, never breaking, never fully passing. In laboratories, scientists splice genes with steady hands. In parliaments and universities, ethicists argue. On frozen tundras, mammoth bones emerge from the thaw, silent witnesses to a conversation they cannot join. Humanity stands in the center of it all, torn between reverence for what was and ambition for what might be. And still the question lingers. When we reach into the past to seize the threads of life, are we weaving a future of redemption or of ruin? Whether or not a mammoth ever walks again, the attempt itself has already changed us. To imagine their return is to stretch the boundaries of what we believe is possible. The mammoth, frozen in ice for thousands of years, has become more than an animal and has become a mirror, a question, a symbol that reverberates through our age. For centuries, extinction was seen as an ending, a final curtain beyond which no story could be told. The mammoth challenges that certainty. Its preserved flesh, its sequenced genes, its whispered potential for resurrection. These remind us that endings may be less absolute than we once believed. Time itself feels less rigid when the past can be touched, studied, even rewritten. The mammoth stands at this strange threshold, part ghost and part possibility. Its silence urging us to reconsider what we mean by death and survival. Yet symbolism cuts both ways. The dream of de-extinction inspires awe, but it also unsettles. It forces us to confront uncomfortable truths, that we are powerful enough to reshape life, but not wise enough to control the consequences. The mammoth becomes a cautionary tale as much as a promise, reminding us that creation and destruction spring from the same hands. To hold its DNA is to hold both potential and peril, both redemption and hubris. And beyond science, beyond ethics, there is poetry in the mammoth's imagined return. Picture it, a herd moving across the snowbound tundra, tusks rising like ivory crescents against the horizon, their shaggy forms blotting out the pale light of the northern sun. Whether this vision ever becomes flesh or remains forever dream, it holds power. It stirs in us a longing not only for the past, but for a world larger than our own. A world where giants still walk, where the earth itself feels alive with wonder. This is why the mammoth endures in our imagination, even if it never endures again in the flesh. It embodies the human desire to resist finality, to defy silence, to carve meaning out of loss. It asks us to consider whether the future should be a place of remembrance or of reinvention, whether we honor the past by preserving memory or by reanimating it. Perhaps, in truth, the mammoth does not need to be resurrected to fulfill its role. Even as bone and frozen hide, even as a sequence of letters on a genetic map, it already shapes our choices. It has sparked debates about climate, ethics, technology, and identity. It has forced us to look at the fragile line between life and death, and to ask whether we are prepared to stand on it. It has reminded us that extinction is not only about animals, but about us, about how we live, how we destroy, how we imagine, how we remember. And so, as Chapter 4 closes, we find ourselves at an intersection between reverence for what has been lost and ambition for what might be restored. The mammoth stands in the middle, silent but present, pulling our gaze in both directions. Its story is no longer just natural history, it is human history too, a tale of survival, disappearance, and the audacious dream of return. Whether the laboratories succeed or fail, whether the tundra one day trembles again with colossal steps or remains quiet beneath the snow, the mammoth has already altered the way we see the world. Its shadow stretches across past and future alike, challenging us to define who we are and who we wish to become. And as we leave this chapter, one truth becomes clear. The mammoth's resurrection is not only about biology. It is about imagination, responsibility, and the fragile, dangerous, beautiful line between what is gone and what we dare to summon back. Far to the north, where the land lies locked beneath snow for most of the year, the ground itself is beginning to stir. The permafrost, once thought eternal, once believed to be nature's vault, has begun to thaw. What melts out is more than ancient bones, more than mammoths entombed in ice. It is carbon, methane, the invisible breath of a planet warming beyond its balance. And with every sigh of gas rising from the ground, the future trembles. The mammoth story, long confined to the past, now collides with this fragile present. Scientists speak of Pleistocene Park, a bold vision born in Siberia, where patches of tundra have been set aside to test a radical idea, that the landscape itself might be healed by rewilding it with great grazers. Where once herds trampled snow, exposing frozen soil, today the land lies vulnerable, its insulating blanket intact, its warmth seeping deeper with each passing season. Could the return of animals like the mammoth, or their ecological stand-ins, help preserve this frozen reservoir of carbon? Could hoof and tusk, weight and wool, become unlikely tools of climate salvation? The idea seems improbable, almost mythic, to fight the warming of the earth with the ghosts of giants. Yet those who walk the tundra see urgency in it. The permafrost holds within it more carbon than all the forests of the world combined. If it thaws completely, the gases released will ripple across climates, seas, and seasons, pushing our fragile equilibrium closer to collapse. The silence of melting ice is deceptive. It does not roar like a storm, but it carries destruction all the same. Pleistocene Park is both experiment and parable. Its founders, guided by the vision of restoring lost ecosystems, have introduced horses, musk oxen, and bison to the Siberian north. These herds, by grazing, trampling, and compacting the snow, allow the deep cold of winter to penetrate the soil, slowing the thaw. In their absence, shrubs and trees encroach, altering the balance, softening the ground. But in their presence, the land begins to echo with an ancient rhythm, a heartbeat of hooves that once kept the steppe alive. And here, again, the mammoth enters the stage, not as a relic, but as a possibility. No other animal was so perfectly suited to this landscape, so thoroughly adapted to the deep cold. Their tusks swept snow aside to uncover grasses. Their massive bodies pressed paths into the frozen crust. Their very presence shaped the land, as architects of an ecosystem now fading into memory. If mammoths were to return, even as hybrids, even as approximations, could they become guardians of the permafrost once more? The question is not only scientific, it is poetic. To imagine herds of woolly giants protecting the earth from warming is to imagine myth reborn as remedy, legend transformed into survival. Yet it is also fraught with doubt. Would their presence truly tip the balance, or is it a dream too fragile to withstand reality? Could the tundra embrace them, or has the world they once knew already vanished beyond recall? Still, the vision persists because the stakes are too high for silence. Climate change has become the defining crisis of our age, and the mammoth has been swept into its narrative, not as victim this time, but as potential ally. Their frozen bodies, once emblems of extinction, now symbolize both warning and hope. Warning, because their disappearance reminds us what climate shifts can erase. Hope, because their imagined return suggests that not all battles must end in surrender. To walk across thawing ground in the Siberian north is to feel history and future colliding beneath your feet. The bones of the past push upward as the soil softens, while the breath of the future escapes invisibly into the air. In that fragile space, the mammoth story gains new urgency. It is no longer about what was lost, but about what might still be saved. The tundra cries out, its silence broken not by sound but by consequence. Whether or not mammoths rise again, the question of the permafrost remains vast and immovable. In it lies the fate of ecosystems, of coastlines, of generations yet unborn. And in that frozen soil, as in the mammoth's bones, we are reminded that the earth keeps no secrets forever. The thaw of permafrost is not only a scientific concern, it is a reckoning. Each year, villagers in Siberia and Alaska watch as their homes tilt, as the once solid ground buckles beneath melting ice. Roads crack, forests drown, rivers change course. What was frozen for tens of thousands of years now gives way in a single human lifetime. And as the earth exhales its ancient breath, humanity is forced to confront the truth. The climate is no longer a distant threat, but an immediate inheritance of our choices. In this fragile drama, the mammoth has become a symbol unexpected, yet strangely fitting. For the public, the creature embodies endurance against the cold, survival in extremes, and the majesty of a world both alien and familiar. To scientists, it represents an ecological keystone, a possible agent of restoration. And to philosophers, ethicists, and dreamers, the mammoth's ghost poses a larger question. What is our role in the Earth's story? Are we caretakers or architects of collapse? The image of a mammoth striding across the tundra ignites the imagination because it blurs the line between myth and science, between past and future. But beneath that stirring vision lies a profound responsibility. If we can summon life from extinction, should we? And if we can enlist it in the struggle against climate change, do we not also inherit the obligation to confront the crisis by every other means at our disposal? The temptation is to see the mammoth as a solution, as if its massive weight and shaggy presence could bear the burden of humanity's emissions, our endless hunger for fuel, our carelessness with the sky. Yet the scientists closest to the work remind us, the mammoth is no miracle cure. Even if herds once again roamed the steppe, their influence would be but one thread in the tapestry of climate, a thread too thin to mend the whole. The true work remains ours. And so the mammoth becomes less a savior than a mirror. In its imagined return, we glimpse both the power of human ingenuity and the limits of our ambition. We can manipulate genomes, preserve cells in nitrogen, and recreate fragments of life. But we cannot recreate the stability of an atmosphere once broken. We cannot edit the sky as easily as we edit DNA. The mammoth, therefore, reflects back our paradox. a species capable of extraordinary creation, yet still stumbling in stewardship. Still, symbols matter. In the face of despair, humanity has always clung to stories of fire stolen from the gods, of floods survived, of heroes who wrestled darkness into dawn. The mammoth may yet join this lineage, not as a fable of conquest, but as a reminder of continuity. If even this ancient giant can find a place in the fight for balance, then perhaps so can we. The tundra is not silent. It whispers through rivers that swell too soon, through storms that carve new scars across coastlines, through the quiet exodus of species slipping beyond their ranges. In these changes, the earth is telling us its story. Whether we listen, whether we choose to act, is the true test of our era. The mammoth, rising from its icy tomb into the realm of possibility, is part of that narrative, not as a distraction, but as a call. The return of the mammoth will not stop the seas from rising, nor the storms from gathering. But it may remind us that what seems impossible can sometimes be made real. It may inspire a generation to see the natural world not as a backdrop, but as a living system in which every action resonates. And perhaps, in its shadow, we will learn again the humility of coexistence, the knowledge that survival is never solitary, but always shared. If we look closely, the permafrost itself becomes a teacher. For millennia, it preserved life in its stillness. Now, as it melts, it reveals the cost of neglect. The mammoth's frozen flesh is not only a relic, it is evidence. Evidence of cycles long past, of climate shifting, of extinctions already written. To hold a mammoth's bone is to hold a warning. And to imagine that same creature walking again is to hold a hope fragile as ice, luminous as frost in moonlight. The tundra's cry is both elegy and summons. It mourns what has been lost, yet it also demands that we answer to the earth, to the future, to ourselves. The mammoth's shadow stretches across both sides of that cry. One foot is planted in the past, reminding us of the costs of change. The other points forward, asking if we are willing to carry the weight of creation with wisdom, not just wonder. In the heart of Siberia lies an experiment that feels less like science and more like prophecy. It is called Pleistocene Park, a swath of tundra reclaimed not by technology alone, but by imagination. Here, scientists Sergei and Nikita Zhimov have sought to recreate, piece by piece, the ancient grassland ecosystem that once spread like a vast green ocean across the north. Their belief is disarmingly simple. If herds of large herbivores could trample, graze, and fertilize the land as they once did, the tundra could transform. Grasslands would replace forests and mosses, reflecting sunlight, slowing thaw, and perhaps even drawing carbon back into the soil. Walking across this landscape feels like stepping between epochs. Musk oxen plod slowly through the snow. Yak graze in patches of windswept grass. Horses, bison, and reindeer huddle together as storms roll in. It is not yet a world of mammoths, but it is a rehearsal, a living stage for a drama that might one day include them. The animals' hooves break the ice crust in winter, compacting snow so the deeper cold penetrates the ground. In summer, their grazing clears moss, giving grass a chance to flourish. Each action, small and rhythmic, echoes an ancient choreography, the subtle labor of life reshaping Earth. To stand in Pleistocene Park is to witness both hope and uncertainty. On one hand, the theory is sound. Grasslands do store carbon differently than forests, and they reflect more sunlight. Herbivores can alter landscapes on a massive scale, as the bison once did in North America. But on the other hand, the scale required is staggering. Could even millions of animals hold back the tide of thawing permafrost? Could they really cool the Earth in any measurable way? Skeptics say no, arguing that the project is a distraction, a romantic vision that underestimates the force of climate change. Supporters reply that even if it slows warming by a fraction, it buys time, and time in the climate crisis is everything. Behemoths themselves are not dreamers in the abstract. Their lives have been marked by cold, hardship, and relentless work. They cut down trees with their own hands, transported animals across frozen rivers, and built fences in soil that shifts beneath their feet. For them, the park is not a symbol, it is a necessity. They speak of mammoths not with whimsy, but with practicality, as engineers of ecosystems, as partners in the labor of maintaining a living world. The mammoth's potential role here is not mystical, but mechanical. With their size and strength, mammoths could push over trees that encroach upon the grasslands, just as they once did. They could dig through snow in winter, opening patches of frozen grass for other animals. Their constant roaming could compact the ground, protecting permafrost from thaw. If enough mammoths lived and moved across the tundra, the impact could ripple through the land for centuries. It is, in essence, the vision of Pleistocene Park amplified into mythic scale. Yet for all its promise, Pleistocene Park also forces us to confront difficult questions. What is the line between restoration and invention? If the mammoth returns, it will not be the same creature that once thundered across the Ice Age plains. It will be a hybrid, shaped by human decisions, carrying fragments of ancient DNA and pieces of modern biology. Will it belong to the past or to us? And when it shapes the land, whose design will it be following? The slow script of evolution or the hurried blueprint of human desperation? The tundra does not answer. It only receives what we give. Hoofprints, fences, footprints, experiments, they all fade into its silence, and yet the silence is deceptive. Beneath the surface, the earth is stirring, thawing, shifting. The permafrost holds more carbon than all the world's forests combined, and as it melts, it whispers of consequences vast enough to remake the climate of the planet. Against such forces, the sight of a musk ox chewing quietly in the snow seems almost absurd. And yet, it is in that chewing, in that grazing, in that relentless cycle of life that hope resides. Perhaps this is the lesson of Pleistocene Park. Not that it will save the world alone, but that it teaches us something about scale, about humility, about the power of persistence. The mammoth, if it comes, will be part of this lesson. A reminder that the solutions to climate change are not only in machines and politics, but also in the quiet, deliberate acts of life itself. When we imagine herds of mammoths roaming alongside bison, horses, and reindeer in Pleistocene Park, it is not just an image of science, it is an image of possibility. And in an age where despair often feels inevitable, possibility is as necessary as oxygen. The story of the mammoth is not merely about resurrection. It is about reckoning. In the silence of the Arctic night, where auroras unfurl like torn silk across the sky, the ground itself seems to breathe. The permafrost exhales methane and carbon dioxide, gases trapped since the Ice Age, and with them comes a reminder. The past is not gone. It waits beneath our feet, returning not as memory, but as consequence. In this uneasy exchange between past and present, the mammoth emerges as both question and answer. It reminds us of a world once governed by balance, where herds shaped ecosystems, predators maintained cycles, and winters held the land in equilibrium. But it also confronts us with our own place in the chain of extinction. After all, it was not only climate that felled the mammoth. It was human hands, human spears, human hunger. To bring the animal back, then, is not only to heal a wound but to reopen it. It asks us, what kind of species are we? The destroyers of worlds or their caretakers? There is a danger in nostalgia. To dream of mammoths marching across the tundra is to risk forgetting the complexity of what once was. The mammoth's return will not erase the factories that burn, the oceans that rise, the forests that fall. It will not absolve us of the centuries of fire we have poured into the air. Yet, it may serve as a compass, a reminder that we cannot continue on the path we walk. that the weight of extinction does not vanish with time. It accumulates, heavy as ice, until someone bears it again. Scientists working on the edge of possibility often describe their mission with restraint. They avoid grand promises, wary of disappointment. But step outside the laboratory and into the world, and the mammoth grows larger than data. It becomes an emblem, a narrative vessel that carries our fears, our guilt, our longing for repair. In schoolrooms, children sketch mammoths alongside dinosaurs, as though both could step back into reality. In news headlines, the word itself evokes awe. Mammoth, a thing vast, immense, impossible to ignore. Perhaps that is its truest role, to force us to look, to make us confront the deep time of this planet, the fragility of its systems, the urgency of our choices. A mammoth on the tundra would not solve climate change, but it would dissolve the illusion that humanity's story is separate from the Earth's. It would remind us, with every shaggy silhouette against the snow, that the boundaries between past and future are thin, and that our decisions now ripple across millennia. Still, even without the mammoth's return, the lesson already exists. The permafrost is melting, whether or not woolly giants tread upon it. Pleistocene Park, with its musk oxen and horses, is already teaching us that ecosystems are not static. They respond, shift, adapt to the pressures placed upon them. The tundra, in its slow unraveling, demands our attention. The mammoth simply amplifies the cry. Imagine the first moment it happens. Not in the laboratory, but on the open land. Snow falling in heavy sheets. Wind carrying the taste of iron and ice. And then, through the white blur, a figure appears, hulking, silent, and impossibly familiar. A mammoth, stepping into a world that had forgotten its sound. For an instant, time folds. The Ice Age stands beside the Anthropocene. And in that collision, we are asked to decide, what will we do with this gift? Because that is what the mammoth is, in the end. Not a solution, not a savior, but a gift. A reminder that even in loss, something can be carried forward. A reminder that extinction is not just an end, but a mirror. And a reminder that the Earth, fragile though it seems, still holds stories waiting to be told. The tundra's cry does not fade when the mammoth steps across it. It deepens. It resonates. It insists that we look not only backward, but forward. For the fate of the mammoth is tied to our own. If we cannot learn to live within the boundaries of a warming world, then the mammoth's second life will be no more secure than its first. And so the chapter closes not with certainty, but with a question. When the Earth calls, through melting ground, through shifting skies, through the slow return of giants, will we listen? Since the dawn of time, humanity has carried a singular obsession, the reversal of loss. Across cultures and centuries, myths of resurrection and rebirth echo like a refrain in our collective imagination. The phoenix rising from its ashes, Orpheus descending into the underworld to retrieve Eurydice, the gods of Egypt weaving together the body of Osiris so he might walk once more. Again and again, the story appears, whispering to us that death may not be the end, that what is gone might be restored, that absence might yield once more to presence. In this eternal narrative, the woolly mammoth now takes its place. To walk among their bones, to touch hair still red gold from millennia of ice, is to confront the raw nearness of the past. Unlike the dinosaurs, whose bones are calcified echoes of deep time, the mammoth lingers close, its flesh preserved, its blood cells intact, its DNA waiting like a half-forgotten script. It is as if the Earth itself conspired to hold them for us, delivering them across ages to arrive in our laboratories at the very moment our tools became sharp enough to read their code. The dream of resurrection has always carried a dual weight, grief and defiance. Grief, because we know the sting of loss, personal, communal, planetary. Defiance, because we refuse to accept that loss as final. To speak of bringing back the mammoth, then, is not only to speak of genetics and cloning. It is to speak of that deep current in the human spirit, the one that rages against endings, that dares to imagine life where only silence remains. Yet unlike the myths, our tools are not made of magic, but of science. In sterile laboratories, under fluorescent light, technicians hold the frozen cells of elephants and mammoths. They splice fragments of ancient DNA into living genomes, creating hybrids that are both and neither. They cultivate embryos in glass, imagining wombs of surrogate elephants that may one day carry the weight of a being unseen for 4,000 years. The process is painstaking, fallible, uncertain. But behind every step is the hum of something larger, the echo of millennia pressing forward into possibility. Why the mammoth? Why not the moa, or the aurochs, or the great auk? The answer lies partly in biology. The permafrost's cold generosity preserved the mammoth's tissue with a fidelity unmatched by most extinct creatures. But the answer also lies in poetry. The mammoth is enormous, majestic, cinematic. Its presence is instantly mythic, a shaggy giant striding out of snowstorms like a herald of another age. In its imagined return, we see not just a scientific achievement, but a vision worthy of story, of legend. It feels inevitable that humanity would choose the mammoth as its first serious attempt to reverse extinction. It feels like destiny written in ice. But destiny is never simple. To resurrect a species is to wrestle with profound questions. Do we honor the past by returning it, or do we distort it by remaking it in our own image? Do we seek redemption for the extinctions we caused, or do we indulge in hubris by thinking we can bend death itself? These questions lie at the heart of the Mammoth Project, transforming it from a technical challenge into a philosophical crucible. And yet, despite all this uncertainty, the image remains irresistible. Imagine it, the first calf, awkward and unsteady, blinking in the dim light of a surrogate elephant stall. Its trunk curling, seeking warmth. Its eyes opening to a world it never knew, but to which it somehow belongs. Cameras would flash, headlines would roar. Voices across the planet would rise in awe or alarm. In that moment, science would step into the realm once occupied by myth, and the ancient dream of resurrection would stand before us, breathing, alive. This dream is not born only of curiosity. It is born of a wound. The mammoth's extinction was not a natural inevitability, but a tragedy accelerated by human hands. Our ancestors hunted them, drove them into decline, watched their herds dwindle until only isolated populations remained on lonely islands. The ice receded, the forests advanced, and with them, the last mammoths faded. To bring them back, some argue, is to right a wrong, to carry a moral obligation across time. It is a gesture of reparation, however small, to a creature that once shared the earth with us. Still, dreams are never without cost. Resurrection, if achieved, would not erase the centuries of absence. It would not restore the entire web of relationships that once sustained the mammoth's world. The calves born in our time would step into a landscape profoundly altered, climates warmer, predators gone, ecosystems shifted. They would be strangers in their own story, shadows resurrected into a world both familiar and alien. But perhaps that is the essence of all resurrection myths. The return is never seamless. Orpheus failed to bring Eurydice fully into the light. Osiris ruled not the living, but the dead. The phoenix rises only to burn again. To return from death is to inhabit an in-between space, a threshold. The mammoth, too, if it walks again, will not be what it was. It will be something new, a bridge between epochs, a living question mark lumbering across the snow. And so, the dream continues. Laboratories refine their techniques. Teams of scientists trade data across continents. Investors pour money into projects with names that sound as though plucked from epics, colossal, revive, and restore. Each announcement draws us closer to the line where imagination and reality meet. Each frozen cell whispers of possibility. Each ancient hair, each preserved tusk, seems to lean toward us, urging, not yet gone, not yet finished. The mammoth waits, not in the way it once did, grazing across endless plains, but in fragments of code and strands of DNA, in the imagination of a species that cannot let go of its shadows. And perhaps it is fitting. Perhaps the mammoth was always meant to linger, to haunt, to return not as memory, but as mirror. For in our longing to bring it back, we see not only the animal, but ourselves, the grief we carry, the defiance we cannot relinquish, the eternal dream of making the lost live again. Science, when it reaches the edges of possibility, always encounters the edges of morality. The Mammoth Project is no exception. To imagine the return of these Ice Age giants is thrilling. But to step into the act itself is to enter a labyrinth of ethics where every path is lined with questions, and none lead to simple answers. The first question is the most intimate. What of the animal itself? To resurrect a mammoth calf is not like assembling a machine. It is a life vulnerable, fragile, full of needs. The surrogate mothers would be Asian elephants, themselves endangered, their numbers dwindling under the pressures of habitat loss and poaching. To place upon them the burden of carrying mammoth embryos is to gamble with their health, to ask them to risk for a species not their own. Some ethicists argue this alone is a cruelty, that in seeking to heal one wound, we inflict another. Then there is the calf itself. It will not be born into a herd of its kind, but into a fractured surrogate family, surrounded by caretakers, cameras, laboratories. What does it mean to bring back an animal when its culture, its instincts, its songs of survival are lost? Elephants teach their young how to find water, how to mourn their dead, how to move as a family. Who will teach a mammoth calf? What does it mean to resurrect flesh without the inheritance of memory? Beyond the welfare of individuals lies the greater question of authenticity. A resurrected mammoth will not be a pure replica of the past. It will be a hybrid, woven from mammoth DNA stitched into the genome of the elephant. It will look, perhaps, like the shaggy giant of old long hair, curved tusks, thick layers of fat, but genetically, it will be something new, a mosaic. Do we deceive ourselves when we call this creature a mammoth? Or is authenticity less about perfection of code and more about the role the animal plays in the world? If it fills the ecological niche, if it tramples snow, grazes grasslands, and reshapes the tundra, does that not make it, in essence, a mammoth reborn? Some critics say that to pursue de-extinction at all is to indulge in arrogance, that the very act of undoing death reveals a hubris dangerous to a species already so careless with life. We extinguished the mammoth once through our hunger, and now we propose to summon it back through our technology. Is this redemption, or is it the final proof that humanity sees the natural world as clay, to be molded, broken, remade at will? Others see it differently. They argue that to bring back the mammoth is not hubris, but responsibility. If our ancestors played a role in their extinction, then perhaps our descendants bear a duty to restore them. Just as a community might restore a ruined temple, so too might humanity restore a vanished species. It is not arrogance, they say, but amends. Not vanity, but repair. But repair is never simple. The tundra of today is not the tundra of 10,000 years ago. The ecosystems that once sustained mammoths have shifted. Forests have crept north. Climates have warmed. Predators are gone. To place a mammoth calf into this altered world is to set it adrift in a landscape only half remembered. Will it thrive or suffer? Will it integrate into the rhythms of the Arctic or struggle as a relic out of place? Some scientists fear the latter, that the mammoth, if reborn, would be little more than a novelty, an exotic display, doomed to captivity or small reserves. A creature alive in body but not in meaning. And then there is the question of scale. One calf, even a handful, is not enough. For a true return, There must be herds, hundreds, even thousands roaming across Siberia, Alaska, Canada. The resources required for such a feat are immense. Money, land, care, decades of patient work. Can humanity commit to such a responsibility? Or will the mammoth become another experiment half-finished, abandoned when the headlines fade? Yet despite these doubts, the vision persists. And it persists because the mammoth is not just an animal, it is a mirror. In debating its return, we are really debating ourselves. How do we see our role on this planet? Are we caretakers who owe a debt to the past, or engineers of the future with the right to bend life to our will? Do we believe in the sanctity of natural boundaries, or do we believe that human innovation is itself a natural force, entitled to shape the course of evolution? The ethical labyrinth is not designed to give us answers. It is designed to reveal the weight of the questions. And perhaps that is the true gift of the Mammoth Project, not the creature itself, but the moral reflection it demands. For in asking whether we should bring it back, we are also asking how we value life, how we face extinction, how we define responsibility. Imagine, for a moment, that the project succeeds. A herd of mammoths wanders the tundra once again. Children in a future classroom watch them on a screen, marveling at their size, their shaggy coats, their long sweeping tusks. The world, for a moment, feels whole. But beneath that awe, the questions remain. Did we do right by them? Did we return them to life, or did we forge them into something else? Were they resurrected for themselves or for us? Perhaps these questions will never be fully answered. Perhaps the mammoth, even if it walks again, will remain a shadow not only of its Ice Age self, but of our own choices, our own contradictions. A living reminder that science can blur lines, but ethics insists on clarity. In the end, the labyrinth does not close. It stays open, its paths winding, its questions echoing. And somewhere in its heart, the mammoth waits, not demanding an answer, but reminding us that every step into resurrection is also a step into responsibility. Long before science entered the tundra with sequencers and incubators, the mammoth lived in the realm of story. Its bones were the first museums, unearthed by hunters who carried tales back to their tribes. Its tusks, bleached by the cold, became offerings, carvings, trade. Its image, painted on cave walls, was not only a record of what was seen, but of what was believed. The mammoth was never just an animal. It was a myth, a presence, a symbol of both survival and loss. To consider bringing it back now is to walk once more into that ancient realm of imagination. For even if the project succeeds, the mammoth will live as much in our minds as it does on the steppe. Science can build its body, but culture will decide its meaning. In Siberia, where mammoth tusks still rise from the thawing permafrost like roots of a buried forest, indigenous stories recall them as earth dwellers, massive beings who tunneled beneath the ground, dying if they ever surfaced. To touch their remains was to touch mystery, to handle a fragment of something that belonged to a hidden world. Imagine what it would mean in those same lands to see one alive again, walking across the snow. Would it be proof of old legends? A bridge between generations of memory? Or would it feel unnatural? An intrusion of laboratory science into sacred landscapes? In the West, the mammoth has become a symbol of the vanished world, a creature whose extinction embodies fragility, a reminder of time's irreversible flow. To resurrect, it would be to alter that symbol, to tell a different story about time itself. It would say, extinction is not final, death is not absolute, the past can be rewritten. That is a story as potent as any myth, and perhaps as dangerous. For if we believe extinction can be undone, will we take it less seriously? Will we allow forests to fall, oceans to empty, species to vanish, thinking always that technology will write them back into being? The mythic weight of the Mammoth Project extends beyond ecology or ethics. It is about the human relationship to destiny. We are a species defined by stories, and to some, the return of the mammoth is the ultimate story of redemption. We once destroyed, but now we restore. To others, it is a story of hubris. We once trespassed against nature, and now we trespass again, refusing even to let death have its course. Think of the cultural resonance. Imagine the first images of a living mammoth calf broadcast worldwide. News anchors trembling with awe. Headlines declaring the return of the Ice Age giant. Documentaries would flood screens, artists would paint them anew, writers would craft epics around their rebirth. The mammoth would not only belong to science, but to cinema, to literature, to politics. It would stride into every corner of our culture as a living symbol of human power over time. Yet, myths are double-edged. Just as fire can warm or burn, stories can inspire or mislead. The mammoth could become a rallying cry for conservation proof that science can heal, that humanity can restore balance. But it could also become a distraction, a spectacle that draws attention away from the quieter, harder work of protecting what still survives. It is easier to marvel at the return of the extinct than to safeguard the endangered that already walk beside us. The mammoth might overshadow the elephant, the caribou, the polar bear, all struggling in the shadow of climate change. And still, the allure persists. For there is something in us that longs to touch the ancient, to reach across the abyss of time and grasp the hand of what was lost. The mammoth is not just biology, it is nostalgia made flesh, the Ice Age reborn in an age of steel and silicon. It stirs the same part of the human heart that sends us to the stars, that drives us to climb mountains, to dive oceans. It is the dream of crossing boundaries thought eternal. In this sense, the mammoth's return would be less a scientific event than a cultural turning point. It would prove that myth and reality are not separate but braided. The stories carved into ivory thousands of years ago would step out of caves and into fields, no longer frozen images, but breathing beings. The boundary between legend and life would dissolve, and humanity would stand in the blur. But myths, once resurrected, cannot be controlled. Once alive, the mammoth will not only inspire awe, it will inspire expectation. Nations may claim it as heritage, companies may see it as opportunity, activists as symbol, skeptics as warning. It will become contested, politicized, pulled into debates far beyond its own existence. The mammoth, in life, will carry the weight of all our stories, redemption, arrogance, nostalgia, innovation. It will not be allowed to simply be an animal. It will be a mirror. And perhaps that is why, despite the uncertainties, the dream persists. For in truth, the mammoth is not only about the mammoth, it is about us. It is about the kind of species we believe ourselves to be. Are we restorers of what we once broke, or dreamers too intoxicated by our own myths to see the cost? Are we storytellers who know how to let go, or are we storytellers who cannot resist trying to rewrite the ending? When the first mammoth walks again, if it does, it will not step only into the tundra. It will step into the story of humanity, carrying with it the weight of every cave painting, every fossilized tusk, every bedtime tale of giants in the snow. It will not walk alone. It will walk with our myths, our fears, our hopes, our contradictions. And that may be its truest resurrection, not only in flesh, but in meaning. The mammoth is not simply a creature of ice and bone. In the modern world, it is also a creature of politics, of markets, of visions too vast and tangled to belong to any single nation. To resurrect such an animal is to create not just life, but influence. The question becomes, who will hold that influence, and how will they wield it? In Russia, where endless tracts of permafrost still clutch mammoth remains, there are whispers of pride and power. To host the first living mammoth could mean prestige, the image of a nation reviving giants from its own soil. In China, where biotechnology advances at a pace matched by ambition. The mammoth could be proof of ascendancy, a demonstration that the future of science is written not in the West but in the East. In America, where private companies chase innovation with fervor, the mammoth is already imagined as an emblem of entrepreneurial conquest, an animal brought back not by nations but by corporations. Each player sees in the mammoth not a being, but a symbol of leadership, of progress, of destiny. But power rarely comes without shadow. A resurrected species cannot be confined to the laboratory. It will ripple through economies, through laws, through landscapes. Who owns a mammoth born in 2025? Does it belong to the company that cloned its cells, to the country where it takes its first breath, or to the global commons of humanity? And who is responsible if it dies, or escapes, or alters the balance of fragile ecosystems? These questions are not written in law. They wait in the silence of courts and parliaments, ready to be fought over when the first calf stumbles to its feet. Then comes the market. A living mammoth would not only be a scientific marvel, it would be an economic force. Imagine tourists flocking to reserves where they could glimpse an Ice Age giant beneath the aurora. Imagine mammoth-branded products, films, even genetic services sold to the wealthy who dream of resurrecting their own extinct pets. What begins as science could swell into commerce, until the mammoth becomes less a creature than a commodity. And in commodification, there is danger. For when the survival of a species depends on profit, its fate lies in the shifting winds of demand, not in the steady ground of respect. Still, there are those who dream nobler dreams. Some envision mammoth herds roaming Siberia again, restoring the ancient mammoth steppe, an ecosystem once rich with grasses, now vanishing beneath trees and shrubs. The theory goes that by trampling the land, digging snow with their tusks, and fertilizing soil with their waste, mammoths could lock carbon in frozen ground, slowing the march of climate change. To release a mammoth is not merely to bring back the past, it could be to secure the future. Yet even here, certainty falters. Ecosystems are delicate tapestries, and to tug one thread can unravel others. Will the mammoth truly stabilize the climate, or will it stumble against forces too vast for even its massive frame? And then there is culture, perhaps the most unpredictable force of all. A mammoth calf broadcast on screens across the globe could ignite wonder, could awaken generations to the power of science and the urgency of conservation. But it could also ignite division. Protesters may call it an abomination, a Frankenstein beast. Indigenous voices may demand recognition, reminding the world that the mammoth walked their stories long before it walked laboratories. Religious leaders may question whether humanity has trespassed into the realm of gods. The mammoth could unite or fracture, inspire or terrify.